Hello, and welcome to our master course on effective learning.
Have you ever read an entire page of a book, gotten to the bottom, and realized you have no idea what you just read? Or perhaps you've spent hours watching a tutorial only to forget it all the next day? This is a universal experience, and it's not because you have a bad memory. The problem is that most of us are only doing half of the work required for learning.
In this first lesson, our objective is to differentiate between the consumption and digestion stages of learning. We'll define these two critical stages and explore why an imbalance between them is the primary reason we forget what we learn.
Let's start with stage 1, consumption. This is the stage everyone is familiar with. It is the simple act of taking information into your brain. Examples include reading a textbook, watching a video like this one, listening to a podcast, or attending a lecture. Most people believe that to learn more, they just need to increase their consumption, read faster, watch videos at double speed, or listen to more audiobooks. This is a critical mistake.
That brings us to stage 2, digestion. This is the stage that most people neglect. It is the act of processing, connecting, and making sense of the information you have consumed. Digestion is where true learning happens. To make this crystal clear, let's use an analogy. Think of learning like eating a meal. Consumption is putting the food in your mouth. It's the first and most obvious step. Digestion is your body breaking that food down, absorbing the nutrients, and turning it into energy and muscle. If you only focus on consumption, shoveling food into your mouth as fast as possible, you haven't given your body time to digest. What happens? You get sick and lose everything you just ate. The same is true for learning. Consuming information without pausing to digest it is the mental equivalent of overeating. Your brain becomes overwhelmed and simply forgets most of what came in.
Let's do a quick 2-minute self-reflection. Think about the last time you tried to learn something new. Roughly estimate the percentage of time you spent consuming versus the time you spent digesting. Was it 90% consumption and 10% digestion? Or maybe even 99% and 1%?
So, if you had to explain the difference between consuming and digesting information, how would you put it? A great way to say it is this. Consuming is just getting information in, like reading or watching a video. Digesting is processing that information to understand it deeply. True learning requires a balance of both. You now know the fundamental problem. We consume too much and digest too little. But what should we be focusing on during that digestion stage? Is the goal to remember everything perfectly? In the next video, we will shatter that myth. Click here to continue to the next lesson. Now that we know we must digest information, a new question arises. What exactly should we be trying to digest? A common belief is that the best learners are those who can remember every single detail, like a human computer. We are about to see why this is not only impossible for most. Our learning objective here is to explain why the goal of learning is understanding and application, not total recall. We will explore the story of a man who could genuinely remember everything to understand the limitations of pure memory, and then differentiate between simple memorization and the far more valuable skills of reasoning and problem solving. There was a man named P.A.C.E.R who had a superpower. He had a near-perfect memory. After reading a book once, he could recall it word for word. He memorized maps so well he could give driving directions between any two cities on Earth. Despite his incredible ability to recall facts, P.A.C.E.R struggled with reasoning. He found it difficult to understand metaphors, abstract concepts, or solve problems that required connecting ideas in new ways. This reveals a critical truth. Memorization is not the same as understanding. Let's call these Level 1 and Level 2 learning. Level 1 learning is recall. This is about memorizing and repeating facts. This is what Kim Peek excelled at. It is the foundation of learning, but it is not the end goal.
Level 2 learning is understanding and application. This is about connecting facts to understand the bigger picture and using that knowledge to solve new problems. This is the skill that truly matters.
Trying to remember everything is like collecting thousands of tools but never learning what they do. The real goal of learning is to build a mental toolkit that you can use. The goal is not to be a walking encyclopedia, but to be a creative problem solver. Let's try a thought experiment. Imagine two chefs learning a recipe. Chef A memorizes the recipe perfectly. Chef B also learns the recipe, but focuses on why each ingredient is used. Now, imagine they are both given slightly different ingredients. Which chef is more likely to successfully adapt the recipe and still make a great dish? Clearly, Chef B is more likely to succeed. Why? Because Chef B understands the principles, Level 2, while Chef A only has a memorized list of facts, Level 1. So, what if a friend tells you, "I'm going to ace this class because I have a photographic memory"? Based on what we've just learned, what friendly advice would you give them? You might tell them that having a great memory is a fantastic start, but the real goal is to go beyond just memorizing facts and focus on building that deeper Level 2 understanding. You have now established the foundational mindset for effective learning. You know to balance consumption with digestion, and you know the goal is deep understanding. But how do you actually digest different types of information? In the next video, we'll introduce the P.A.C.E.R framework, your new toolbox for learning anything. Click here to move on to Module 2. Welcome to Module 2. Imagine you have a toolbox. Inside, you have a hammer, a screwdriver, and a wrench. If you need to turn a bolt, which tool do you use? The wrench, of course. Using a hammer would be ineffective and frustrating. Learning is the same. Not all information is a nail. We need different mental tools for different types of information. In this lesson, our objective is to define the purpose of the P.A.C.E.R framework. We'll introduce the P.A.C.E.R acronym, which stands for 5 distinct categories of information, and explain why identifying which category you are dealing with is the critical first step to learning it effectively. The P.A.C.E.R framework is a simple system to help you categorize the information you are consuming. The letters stand for Procedural, Analogous, Conceptual, Evidence, and Reference. The golden rule of P.A.C.E.R is this. For each category of information, there is a specific and highly effective digestion process. By first identifying the type of information, you can then choose the right mental tool for the job, making your learning faster and more permanent. Let's try sorting a simple shopping list of things to learn for making a pizza. The list is the step-by-step instructions for kneading dough, the scientific concept of how yeast makes dough rise, and a friend's comment that making pizza dough is a lot like playing with Play-Doh. Without even knowing the official definitions yet, which item feels like a how-to instruction, which feels like a big idea, and which feels like a connection? The first one is the how-to, the second is the big idea, and the third is the connection. You're already naturally sorting information. So, in your own words, what is the main purpose of the P.A.C.E.R framework? Why is it like having more than just a hammer in your toolbox? The purpose of P.A.C.E.R is to help you sort the information you're learning into different types. Using the right tool makes learning much more effective than just trying to memorize everything. Now that you understand the framework, it's time to master the tools.
In our very next lesson, we're going to dive deep into the first category, P for procedural, the how-to information that surrounds us. You'll learn the one and only way to make it stick. Click here to keep going. Have you ever watched a video on how to tie a specific knot, ride a bike, or use a new software feature? This type of how-to information is everywhere. It's not about theories or facts, it's about action. This is procedural information. Our objective is to identify procedural information and its correct digestion method. We will define it and explain why its one and only digestion method is practice. So, what is procedural information? It's any set of instructions that tells you how to execute a task. It is a sequence of steps. Examples include a recipe, instructions for assembling furniture, or a coding tutorial. The only digestion method that works for this is practice. You cannot learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. You must do the thing. The digestion for procedural information is immediate practice. The big trap here is the "I'll practice later" mindset. Many people consume procedural information, say they read 10 chapters of a coding book, and tell themselves, "I'll try this out this weekend." By the time the weekend comes, you've forgotten the details. The rule is, if you don't have time to practice it now, you don't have time to learn it now. It's better to learn one step and practice it than to learn 10 steps and forget them all. So let's say your friend wants to learn Spanish. He has decided to read a book about Spanish grammar from cover to cover before ever trying to speak a single word. What type of information is he consuming, and what advice would you give him? He is consuming procedural information, how to use grammar to speak. You would advise him that the best way to learn this is to practice immediately. He should read one grammar rule, then immediately try to form a sentence using that rule. Reading the whole book first will lead to him forgetting most of it. So, let's say your friend wants to learn Spanish. He has decided to read a book about Spanish grammar from cover to cover before ever trying to speak a single word. What type of information is he consuming, and what advice would you give him? He is consuming procedural information, how to use grammar to speak. You would advise him that the best way to learn this is to practice immediately. He should read one grammar rule, then immediately try to form a sentence using that rule. Reading the whole book first will lead to him forgetting most of it. To recap, when you encounter procedural information, a set of steps, your digestion method is simple and non-negotiable. Practice. Do it immediately to lock it in. You've just mastered the tool for learning any skill. But what about new ideas that are complex and abstract? For that, we need a different tool. In the next lesson, we'll cover A for analogous information and how to use it to build a bridge from what you already know to what you want to learn. Click here to continue. The human brain loves shortcuts. It's much easier to understand a new, complex idea if we can connect it to something simple that we already know. This is like explaining the internet to someone from the 1950s by saying, it's like a giant instant library and post office combined. This is analogous information. Here, our objective is to identify analogous information and its correct digestion method. We will define it and explain how to digest it using a powerful two-step process, finding the connection and then critiquing it. Analogous information is any new information that is related to your prior knowledge. It creates a bridge. Examples: the flow of electricity through a wire is like the flow of water through a pipe. Simply finding an analogy is a good start, but the real learning comes from critiquing it. This means asking 3 critical questions. How are they similar? How are they different? Where does this analogy break down? This process forces your brain to engage deeply with the new concept. Let's try it. Consider the common analogy. The human brain is like a computer. First, how is this analogy helpful? Well, both process and store information. But now, let's critique it. How is it false, or how does it break down? You might realize that computers store data perfectly, while our brains forget and mix up memories. Computers follow rigid logic, while brains are influenced by emotion. Thinking about these differences forces a deeper understanding of how the brain actually works. So, when learning about the heart, a student thinks, oh, the heart is like a pump. How could they use the critique method to turn this simple observation into a powerful learning moment? They could critique the analogy. How is it similar? It pushes fluid through tubes. How is it different? A mechanical pump is simple, but the heart is made of living tissue, has 4 chambers, and is controlled by electrical signals. Where does it break down? A simple pump doesn't also supply its own fuel and oxygen like the heart muscle does. This critical process deepens their understanding of the heart's unique properties. Now you can handle how-to steps and connections to old knowledge. But what about the core theories and big ideas of a subject? That's where we tackle the most important information type of all, C for conceptual. I'll show you how to map out big ideas in the next lesson. Click through to continue. If procedural information is the how-to, conceptual information is the what and why. It's the difference between knowing the steps to bake a cake, procedural, and understanding why baking soda makes the cake rise, conceptual. Our goal is to identify conceptual information and its correct digestion method. We will define it and explain why mapping is the most effective way to digest it. Conceptual information includes the theories, principles, facts, and relationships that explain a subject. It's the network of ideas that forms the foundation of a topic, like the theory of gravity or the principles of supply and demand. A textbook or lecture presents concepts in a straight line, word after word. But in an expert's mind, knowledge exists as a web or network. An expert can jump from one idea to another because they see the connections. A beginner's job is to recreate this web, not to memorize the line. The best way to do this is to map it out visually, often called mind mapping. Start with the main topic in the center of a page. As you learn, add key concepts as branches. Then, draw lines to connect related ideas. This process of building connections is the process of understanding. In fact, we can do this right now. Take the subject of this lesson. Get a piece of paper and write conceptual information in the center. Draw a branch and label it, "What is it?" And add keywords like theories, principles, big ideas. Draw another branch and label it digestion method, and add a sub-branch from mapping. Now draw a line connecting mapping back to big ideas, and write recreates the expert's network on the line. So imagine a student learning about the solar system. They're trying to memorize a list of facts. Jupiter is big, Mars is red, Saturn has rings. What type of information is this, and what would be a better way for them to digest it? This is conceptual information. A better way to digest it would be to create a map. They could put solar system in the middle, then draw branches for each planet. On each branch, they could add the facts, but they could also draw connections, like a line between Earth and Mars labeled neighboring rocky planets, or a line connecting Jupiter and Saturn labeled gas giants. This builds a network of understanding, not just a list of facts. We've now covered how to handle actions, procedural, connections, analogous, and big ideas, conceptual. But what about the small stuff, the specific numbers, names, and dates? In our next module, we'll round out the P.A.C.E.R framework by learning how to handle the data in details with E for evidence and R for reference. Click here to begin Module 3. If I open this book and tell you World War I was a devastating conflict, you'd probably nod and say, okay, sure, that's a concept. But what if I said World War I was a devastating conflict with an estimated 20 million deaths? See the difference? That specific number isn't a concept. It's the hard data that makes the concept real. It's the proof. In our system, we call this evidence, and most people try to learn it in a way that's incredibly inefficient. Welcome back to our series on the P.A.C.E.R. framework. Today, we're tackling the E. Our objective is simple. First, we'll define evidence information and show you how to spot it. Then I'll teach you the surprisingly simple two-part digestion method, store and rehearse, that will save you hours of frustration. Let's get into it. Evidence is the collection of specific facts, statistics, examples, or case studies that support or make a concept more concrete. It's the prove it or for example part of what you're learning. The best way to think about it is with our tabletop analogy. Think of concepts, the big ideas, as the tabletop. It's the broad, usable surface. But that tabletop is useless if it's just lying on the floor. It needs legs to hold it up. The legs are the evidence. They support the concept and give it structure. You need both to have a functional piece of knowledge. For example, to be healthy, it's important to get enough sleep. That's the concept, our tabletop. Now, the evidence. Studies show that getting less than 6 hours of sleep per night can increase the risk of heart disease by up to 20%. Those are the legs holding the concept up. They make it solid. So how do you digest these legs without getting overwhelmed? You use a simple two-part method: store and rehearse. And the key is you do them at different times. Part 1 is store. As you are consuming, reading a chapter, or watching a video, the moment you identify a piece of evidence, your only job is to get it out of the book and into a safe place. Don't try to memorize it, just capture it. You can use a notes app, a spreadsheet, or my personal favorite, a flashcard. On the front, you write the question: risk of less than 6 hours sleep. And on the back, 20% increased risk of heart disease. Done. Move on. The goal is speed. Part 2 is rehearse. This happens later, in a separate study session. This is when you actually practice using the evidence. You don't just stare at the flashcard. You actively recall it and connect it back to the concept. You'd look at the front of the card and say out loud, okay, the concept is that sleep is important. The evidence I have is that less than 6 hours of sleep leads to a 20% increased risk of heart disease. That act of explaining is the rehearsal. Let's put this to the test. A student is learning about climate change. While reading a chapter, they stop for 20 minutes and try desperately to memorize the exact carbon dioxide concentrations from a chart. Based on the store and rehearse method, what is their mistake? Pause the video and think it through. Their mistake is mixing two different tasks. Their main job while reading is to understand the concept, the greenhouse effect. The specific numbers are evidence. They should spend 5 seconds storing that data in a note and then continue focusing on the concept map. The memorization comes later, during rehearsal. Okay, let's recap the power of the E in P.A.C.E.R. First, evidence is the prove it information, the facts, stats, and examples that act as the legs for your conceptual tabletop. Second, the digestion method is a two-step process. Step 1, store the evidence quickly while you're learning. Don't memorize, just capture it. Step 2, rehearse it later in a separate session by practicing how you would use it to explain the main idea. This is where the memory is built. Your challenge is to practice this separation. For the next thing you learn this week, I want you to find just one piece of evidence. Practice the art of quickly storing it and actively resisting the urge to memorize it on the spot. This one habit will make learning data-heavy subjects so much less stressful. If this helped, click that like button. And make sure you're subscribed, because in the next video, we're tackling R for reference, the most commonly confused category, and showing you how it's fundamentally different from evidence. See you there. Think about the Wi-Fi password at your favorite coffee shop, or the specific name of a molecule you need for an exam. Is that information a big idea? No. Does it prove a concept? Not really. It's just a random, specific detail you have to know. This is the final category in our P.A.C.E.R framework, and it's the one that causes the most confusion. We call it reference information, and today you will learn why treating it differently than evidence is a superpower for efficient learning. Welcome back. Today we are tackling the R in P.A.C.E.R, and our goal is to get laser-focused on one thing: differentiating reference from evidence.
First, we'll define reference info and give you a simple question to tell them apart. Then, we'll cover the store and rehearse method with a crucial twist that makes it perfect for this type of information. Let's do it.
So, what is reference information? It's any highly specific, often arbitrary detail you need to recall, but that doesn't deeply change your conceptual understanding. Think vocabulary words, product model numbers, specific names or dates. Now for the most important part of this entire video. Pay close attention. The key difference between evidence and reference is its purpose. Evidence proves a concept. The statistic about sleep proves the concept that sleep is important. Reference is just an associated fact. The name of a specific bone in your wrist doesn't prove how the wrist works. It's just a label you have to know for the test. Here is your golden question, your litmus test. Ask yourself, does this detail help me explain a bigger idea? If the answer is yes, it's evidence. If the answer is no, and it's just a standalone fact I have to memorize, it's reference. The digestion method for reference is store and rehearse, but with a twist. The store part is identical to evidence. As you're reading, the moment you see a piece of reference info, just dump it. Get it onto a flashcard or into a list, and move on. Don't break your flow. The real difference is in the rehearsal. Since reference info doesn't connect to a big concept, you can't really explain it. The goal isn't deep understanding, it's direct recall. This is where simple drilling comes in, and it's the absolute perfect use case for flashcard apps that use spaced repetition systems, SRS. Tools like Anki, Quizlet, or Brainscape are designed for one thing: drilling standalone facts into your memory as efficiently as humanly possible. All right, time to use our new litmus test. For each of the following, is it primarily evidence, E, or reference, R? Number 1, the fact that Shakespeare wrote 39 plays.
Number 2, a specific quote from Hamlet that you would use to argue that Hamlet was indecisive. And number 3, the year the Declaration of Independence was signed, 1776.
How did you do? Let me know in the comments. Getting this distinction right is a huge unlock.
Let's wrap up the R in P.A.C.E.R. First, reference information is made up of highly specific, often arbitrary details you just have to know. Second, the ultimate test to tell it apart from evidence is to ask, does this detail help me explain a bigger idea? If not, it's reference. And third, the digestion method is to store it quickly, but rehearse it differently, using direct recall and spaced repetition flashcard apps, which are the perfect tool for the job. Here is my challenge to you. Think of a class or a skill you're learning right now. Find a list of vocabulary, names, or functions you need to learn. That's your reference info. Your task is to stop trying to memorize them from the page. Instead, spend 5 minutes putting them into a flashcard app and commit to a 2-minute rehearsal session every day this week. You have now learned all 5 categories of the P.A.C.E.R framework. Give yourself a pat on the back. If this video helped you, hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed because in the final module, we put it all together. We will assemble every piece into one powerful, step-by-step workflow that will transform you into an active, efficient learner for life. You don't want to miss it.